we didn't invent the drug price increase game. I kind of learned it from this company called Marathon.
Marathon, okay.
Yeah, Marathon raised the price of, well, it was actually called Ovation. I should take a step back. Ovation raised the price of a number of medicines it acquired from Lundbeck and then sold, or from various companies, I think Merck and others. I think it sold the company to Lundbeck for $800 million. And we sort of said, this is a pretty good business model. If you pair that with actually doing research, which as far as I remember, Ovation didn't do, and actually try to sort of make benefits and better conditions for these sort of forgotten diseases, you can actually kind of have a nice new style of drug company. Again, there's sort of other companies that have tried this and done this, some successfully, some not. But it's certainly an interesting sort of theory. Valeant sort of tried to do a lot of different things, and this was sort of one piece of Valeant that actually worked better than you would imagine. I think the problem that felled Valeant wasn't even Philidor; it was actually just this overpaying for acquisitions. They overpaid for two acquisitions with leverage, right? So with Salix and with Bausch, they paid way too much. And they had to eat that debt for a long time. So that debt is more or less what caused Valeant's problems, I think. But
I remember Munger calling it. I know you're a big Munger and Warren Buffett fan. I remember Munger calling them out specifically. And then I guess a few months later, it just kind of all unraveled.
Munger has a big mouth, in my opinion. He's obviously a great investor.
I love it.
Yeah, he's sort of like a WWE guy sometimes. He said that Valeant's a sewer, so he was sort of disparaging this idea that like all the drugs that nobody wants go to Valeant. But the thing about the drug business, which he doesn't know anything about, is that that's kind of how the drug business works. Like there are no crown jewel assets in pharmaceuticals. They all go expiry, they all go to zero. Like that's just the nature of pharma. There are no there's no Coca-Cola pharma, right? So when he sort of says sewer, what I think he's trying to imply is, this is just roll up with too much debt. And it's like, well, Berkshire Hathaway is a roll-up. It just does it more slowly and carefully and methodically, and it buys better assets. But there's nothing wrong with a roll-up. And I think that he actually saw a little bit of vision of Valeant, and because you remember, Bill Ackman said that Valeant is Berkshire Hathaway, and that really, I think, probably ticked Munger and Buffett off. Yeah,
I remember Ackman lost a lot of money on Valeant, I think.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny because the guys at Valeant are super sharp. I think that it all went to their head. This is Rajiv and Mike. Mike, I don't know how much to go through it, but I think he suffers from some illnesses that are serious healthcare problems for him. And I think that he sort of was in this mode where his stock went from a very low price to a very high price. And I think that's, in his case, was not a healthy thing for him. He went from sort of having a drug company to being the belle of the ball. And once he was the belle of the ball, I think firms like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and others, JP Morgan, were basically willing to give him unlimited credit line to buy whatever drug company he wanted. There was a point in time where he was thought to be in a merger discussion with Eli Lilly. So, it's pretty heady stuff to I can tell you myself. I mean, to go from having a $500 million market cap drug company or $1 billion market cap drug company to be talking about, I think at one thing in JP Morgan, he projected that he would be a top 10 pharmaceutical company in the next few years, which was, again, really kind of pompous and crazy. And that kind of stuff does go to your head when the CEO of JP Morgan calls you to say, what deal do you want to get done in pharma? And you say, I want to buy Eli Lilly. Let's make this happen. And you fly down to meet with Eli Lilly. I mean, it's what kind of, that gets your blood pumping, I mean, for a deal guy, there's nothing more exciting.
Pfizer
right?
next.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that got to his head, and he started outpaying Johnson & Johnson and outpaying Merck for deals. And, that's not going to work in the long run. And it kind of caught up to them. But the first 10, 20, 30 deals Valeant did were really good, really sharp deals. And they worked out well. But again, that punch bowl can be very intoxicating. And that's typically how roll-ups end. And that's why Berkshire has worked out as a roll-up. Nobody wants to call Berkshire a roll-up, but the reality is when you buy 100 different companies over 50 years, you're a roll-up. And the reason Berkshire worked so well is because it's been a patient roll-up, right? They never sort of need to do deals. They never rush to do deals. They never overpay. That patience is the real testament to why Buffett and Munger have done so well. I think that's the hardest thing in investing, especially when somebody gives you a big fat pocketbook. Valeant could do no wrong when it was at $200 a share, right? And then when it plummeted to $10, no financing.
Yeah, that's fair. I would say though, as we've seen with Berkshire, as you get to scale and bigger, it's really hard to move the needle. So maybe that's kind of one of the things that led to Valeant's downfall, is that they were trying to kind of swing even bigger and bigger, and they found out that super tricky to do in such a short time. Are you still in kind of the pharma industry or working in that or no?
Yeah, so I have a fascinating legal case going on. I predict that we'll have a resounding victory. I just saw my lawyer on Friday. He thinks that he hasn't seen a district court opinion this bad in a really long time. Every lawyer I've talked to feels the same way. You can't ban somebody from their vocation. It's the most unconstitutional concept that you can think of. And I think the FTC and the New York AG are in for a pretty significant embarrassment as I sort of fight back. They got a very good judge draw. The judge seemed really, really against me, which isn't a surprise to some extent. And I think that a more sober appeals court will reverse this. We've seen the New York appeals court slam down the FTC and the SEC many times. So getting a district court victory is not some fantastic thing. Having said that, I acknowledge I'm behind the eight ball here. I lost a district court case. I have to prevail in this appeals court, and the only person to save me after that is Clarence Thomas. So I think, I hope that we appeal. We have appealed, but I hope that we prevail in the next litigation. If we don't, I have no problem not being in the pharmaceutical industry in the United States. I can be in the pharmaceutical industry in any other country. It's a big world out there. Again, I think it's a really sad thing. A number of patients of diseases I follow are going to be writing the appeals court and explaining that I'm, in some cases, their only hope. The rare disease business has grown significantly, but there's still 7,000 rare diseases and just not that many people too excited about various rare diseases. And so if you have one of these illnesses and there isn't much hope for you, you're taking somebody who cares a lot about rare diseases, who in fact my criminal sentencing judge said that she believed, after reviewing my case thoroughly and getting to know me over the course of several years, she said she believed that I had a lot of promise and a lot of work to do in the rare disease space and that I'd make a great contribution. Nevertheless, I've been banned from working in the rare drug disease space, which I really enjoy doing. There's some passion that there's no motivation quite like that when you meet families of rare disease patients that are all relying on you to fix their enzymatic error. And when you look at the array of tools that we have now in the pharmaceutical industry, there's never been a better time, sadly, to be a rare disease patient because we have this armamentarium of tools available to fix some of these illnesses. We just need the people and the capital. I'm a person and I have capital, so to me, it's really it doesn't sort of the ruling doesn't really make any sense. I can't even do research on a cure for a rare disease. I could almost understand if once the pricing of the commercialization comes in, maybe I can bow out. But I could sort of understand that. I don't agree with it, but I can't even do an IND. I can't even do a clinical trial for a rare disease drug. I mean, that seems pretty crazy. I have brought about a dozen INDs to this world that wouldn't have existed without me for rare diseases. So to me, it's sort of like just sort of a head scratcher in terms of like, why would you want to reduce the amount of sort of innovation and the amount of at least clinical experimentation available? In fact, again, we don't think that's a legitimate decision in terms of the legal standing. She didn't cite any precedent that would support that. So I think that'll easily be reversed. I don't lose sleep over it.
I got a question about the generic industry as a whole, but there seems to be a big push to reshore a lot of manufacturing to North America. And particularly with China, I think India is a little bit less scary for investors right now, but particularly supply chains that are in China, they want to bring that all back to North America. So do you see drug prices rising as a result of that all coming back stateside? And if you think there's an opportunity in that space?
Yeah, it's sort of like economics 101, as you're implying. I mean, reshoring would raise prices. Reshoring would cause for more employment in our country and more sort of what would appear to be more sort of I guess more national security. The trade-off would be you're becoming protectionist, and I would argue it's a pretty bad idea. Obviously, China is a sort of a, I don't know if you could say it's openly hostile to America or not. That relationship seems to change with the seasons, but China probably shouldn't be depended on for quite a lot of supply, and it isn't at the moment. I mean, it's an important player, but it's certainly not the most important player or the only player. Again, reshoring is tough to do if you have a huge number of Indian chemical engineers who are a quarter of the price of American ones. It's really hard to sort of justify that. It's a protectionist ploy. It certainly wouldn't hurt the United States very much in the short run for employment and for even costs. but it still makes one wonder if there's a reason we don't build iPhones here. There's a reason we don't, do a lot of this stuff here. It's because it just flies against the laws of economics. And, Trump was a protectionist Republican, which is a really bizarre thing for me, amongst many other conundrums he represented. Bigger problems than just protectionism. But protectionism is like a big sin, I think, in any economic school. Like it really doesn't make sense. And, I don't think it makes sense here either. And
it might not make sense economically, but if it can be seen by the electorate as
politically, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Politically, you can get a huge amount of push.
I think Mark Cuban invested $10 million in a factory in somewhere in Dallas.
Oh, I know. Yeah, he wants to. This is his next move, is to sort of make generics for his own pharmacy, which again would be a sort of a vertically integrated drug company pharmacy, which is again not sort of the norm. Doesn't mean it's bad, but there's a reason people in generic drugs don't want to be in pharmacy. It really, the two businesses have nothing to do with each other, other than they share sort of customer point, obviously. So if he wants to get into generic drugs, he joins a list of about, 1,000 different companies, and he's welcome to compete in those 1,000 companies. But I don't know what edge he's got, unless he has some like amazing way to make medicine that I'm not aware of.
Probably he's banking on automation.
Every drug company is automated and trying to be more automated. I mean, there's no secret sauce he's got in terms of making generic drugs. Is not even something that's given to automation. It's like you get raw. I mean, first of all, even most generic companies don't even make their own API. So half the cost is this API. You get the API from some foreign specialty chemicals company, and then you're almost always automated in terms of fill finish, of turning that raw chemical into an actual final product. That part can be automated, but that's already well automated. There's no extra automation you can do there. And then the next piece of actually getting FDA approval, well, that's bioequivalence, and that's probably around a third of the cost of between the actual bioequivalence and the FDA filing. That's probably about a third of the cost of any ANDA anyway. So you can't automate that. So to me, there's no way to save money in the generic business. We've figured out every way to wring every penny out of that business. Look at Teva, look at Sun. Any cost savings you can make in generics, you try, but it's hard to make a really high margin generics company. You have to focus on injectables, inhalers, things like that. And those are really hard to do. Those are where generic companies make a lot of money. Like if you can do an inhaler or a injectable, the equipment needed to make those is quite different from eye drops, lotions. Those equipments are quite a bit different from the average pill. And so far from what I can see, Cuban's selling a lot of the average pills, and if he wants to make, complex generics, he's welcome to, but that field's really crowded too. So there's no real easy place. And I think that's my general point here. Okay.
My understanding of why a lot of these medications are also very expensive is not just because the R&D that goes into drug discovery, it is quite expensive, and it takes a lot of time. However, it's proven that these companies are making the correct margins across the world. It's just in the United States that it's a problem. And it's starting to become a problem here in Canada as well, because of how it works with insurance. And it has nothing to do with enough pills have been sold to cover the drug discovery. It's just about profits. And that's a problem, isn't it?
I mean, if you think profits are a problem, then I think...
I don't think profits are a problem, but
that's what
profits are a problem when you don't have a healthcare system that allows people to have access, for everybody to have access. Well, I think making money, there's one thing is one capitalism, and another thing is cronism. So they're very different things, because I'm a capitalist.
Well, most healthcare cost is actually on the labor side, so physicians, nurses, and so forth. So do you think they should all have a lower salary so they don't have too much profits?
Why are we bringing up the physicians? I mean, I'm
that's
not
half of healthcare
in your system, meaning that the physicians are. I mean, I'm not going to get into salaries of what nurses get paid, because I don't think they get paid a lot of money compared to if we're talking about who makes money in the healthcare system, nurses don't make money.
In our country, I beg to differ, because in our country, healthcare labor cost is about half of all of our costs. We spend over $1 trillion in this stuff. So doctors in America make around $300,000 a year. So
do nurses make that?
No, the nurses have nurses have less qualifications than doctors, but they also cost money too. So the point is that labor is a major cost in healthcare. So if you agree with me that we can trim all healthcare costs by say 20 or 30%, including physicians and nurses, and that they should all be required to work for free on Fridays. That would do it, actually.
I don't think it's a fair assessment, because if we are going to put percentages about cost and percentages of who makes what, you can't compare what a single doctor makes over what a pharmaceutical makes over a year.
No, sure, you sure can, because
if you're going to try
pharmaceuticals.
to trim costs and what an insurance company makes over the year.
Is it also the supply of doctors?
Let me just, yeah, that's right. So let me just say this. So let's say I passed a law tomorrow that said every single pharmaceutical in the country is free. How much do you think healthcare costs would drop in America?
Enrique, I want to say that in France
that's just a
in
question.
companies,
I answered your
pharmaceuticals
question,
are making
so maybe,
a lot of money.
Maybe you can answer my question.
I'm just saying to you that
I'm just asking you a question.
As familiar as
I
you
appreciate,
are, but I know that in France.
I'm muting you real quick. I just want you to answer the question. If I gave every drug away in America for free, would that really move the needle for American healthcare costs? Do you think it would? Because it wouldn't.
You have to separate healthcare costs from the actual.
Okay, healthcare costs are everything, right? So it's not just medicine. You have to sort of think about, what does our healthcare system provide? It provides healthcare, right? You're not talking about a pharmaceutical reimbursement system. You're talking about healthcare reimbursement. And the inconvenient truth is that doctors cost a lot of money, and that doctors don't want to take a tighter belt. They can. They make $300,000 a year. They don't want to take a tighter belt, because I wouldn't want one either. I want to make millions of dollars as a neurosurgeon. I want to make hundreds of thousands of dollars as a general care practitioner. It's really hard to look at Dr. Johnson in the eye and tell him or her, yeah, you have to sort of, take a 20% haircut to your salary. Nobody wants to do that. I think that's a really tough challenge, because there's some humanistic part. You look at Pfizer or Merck and you say, oh yeah, they take 20% from them. But the reality is 90% of healthcare costs in America are not branded drugs. They're everything else. So you can give branded drugs away for free. You can destroy the pharmaceutical industry. There'll be no new drugs.
You talked about healthcare as a cost of GDP, so the ratio. And I remember reading in Singapore, it's like super low. You could compare the healthcare to GDP to African countries, but they still have world-class healthcare. So what are they doing different?
It's a small country, so I don't know exactly what's going on in Singapore. I can't tell you that. But I think in your modern sort of free market world, there is increasing demand for healthcare. That's just irrepressible. I mean, nobody doesn't want more healthcare, as I mentioned. There's just an infinite demand for this. And in America, we have that. And again, we have a big system. It costs trillions of dollars to provide healthcare in America, and most of that cost is not pharmaceuticals. It's just a really inconvenient sort of piñata, and Laura, I respect your opinion and everything, but at the same time,
you don't, because you're muting me each time I want to say something, and you didn't let me finish what I had to say, and I was saying something about other countries.
Well, I asked you a question, and you weren't. I was asking you a question,
because you only want to talk about the states.
I was asking you a question, and you weren't willing to answer it. So I think that to the extent you're willing to answer it, we can have a dialogue. I also can't talk to you the entire time. There's other people here waiting for a question. You're kind of just going off in different directions, and I have to, as the moderator of this discussion, govern it with some amount of some amount of what I want to sort of talk about. So in any event, I do think that healthcare is a big concept. It's surgeries, it's medical devices, it's OTC products, it's all kinds of things. It's not just pharmaceuticals, but we want to beat up on pharmaceuticals. We're 10% of the costs, but 90% of the chagrin, and it doesn't make any sense. It's just something that, for whatever reason, and maybe it's partially my fault, it's 1 or 2% my fault, and 1 or 2% Purdue's fault, and 1 or 2%, Valeant's fault, and et cetera, et cetera. But, the industry gets this bad rap because, for whatever reason, and I think, again, 10% of the cost, but 90% of the bad rap. And again, there are people like Mark Cuban who will virtue signal and grab that bad rap and say, look at me, I'm going to fix this. And the reality I think we've sort of exposed today is that he's not fixing this. And that I think that, nobody's sort of come in here and said, well, you're wrong, Cuban's right, this is going to fix our healthcare system. This is going to lower costs for drugs in America. All we've really gotten is a discussion broadly about, why are drugs expensive in America? What are the tricks that drug companies are using to make all this money? And I've said over and over again that I actually don't think drug companies, quote unquote, make too much money. I mean, this is an industry trusted, right, to make the next new drug for you, the next new medicine that's going to help you, that will inevitably go generic and you'll inevitably get for very, very low cost. I think that's immutable. Impossible to argue with, right? So why do we want to hurt this industry? Why do we want to clobber it? Why do we want to lower its profits? Why is that? One day I might have Alzheimer's. I'd love to have an Alzheimer's drug. One day I might have Parkinson's. I'd love to have a Parkinson's drug. Probably somebody in this room has Alzheimer's or knows somebody that does, or Parkinson's or anything else. We all want medicines for these things. So why are we beating up this industry when, again, it's 10% of the cost and it provides a great service? And again, even if you think that those first 10, 15 years are really expensive, all right, 10 or 15 years from now, those drugs will be really cheap. So to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to beat up on the industry.
Generic drugs in general, like you see telemedicine companies like Hims and Curology, and they're taking a branded approach to generics. And I was wondering if you can get like someone on a subscription model and there would be a higher LTV. Do you think there's any margin there at all in the telemedicine space for these generic drugs, branding them?
It's interesting you say that. Medicines Company was a company before Novartis acquired it that had a little generics business, and their play was that they were going to sell generics with a twist, that they were going to market their generics. And there's a space called branded generics, and that, you know, there was this TLC that they'd provide face-to-face with salespeople. It didn't work out. They sold that business. It wasn't a good business. But I think you see people like Hims and Rowan and other companies like that trying to go ahead and do what you're talking about. There's other companies like Cerebral as well, right, that are doing this on the mental health side. That are just writing scripts of ADHD drugs left and right. So I don't know. It doesn't seem smart to me, but it doesn't seem like the worst idea either. I think at least you have some tie-in where you can sort of charge a premium service. Whereas I think pharmacies, you know, nobody has that like TLC for a pharmacy. Oh, like, oh yeah, this pharmacy is really taking care of me. I know I'm paying a higher price, but I'm gonna stick with these guys because I love them so much. I mean, if anybody feels that way about CVS or Walgreens, let me know. But I certainly don't. You know, so it's hard to sort of like make that mental identification with a pharmacy company or something like that and feel like, okay, I'm a real member of this. I really want to do this. Whereas I think, you know, maybe him and hers can do that. I don't know.
Yeah, and what's also interesting too, it's like some of these prescription skincare companies, they do have compounding facilities where they're able to blend multiple skincare drugs into one formula. I don't know if you've heard of something like Triluma before.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Where it's tretinoin and hydroquinone. I think that's there is some interesting possibilities there if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, dermatology is a bit of a racket. It's sort of always been kind of this bizarre little cottage industry where a lot of weird stuff goes on, and it's kind of important to separate that from the rest of the medicine world because, yeah, it's just a bizarre place. And generics in derm are kind of like one of the biggest profit centers because you can kind of take any generic derm drug and like change its like oil to ointment to cream to this to that, and then change the concentration, mix in different ingredient, and you just got hundreds of these different combinations, and they end up being promotionally responsive as well. Dermatologists will tend to prescribe this stuff if they get pushed it. So it's a really weird side business for the drug world. It's very, I mean, if you want to start off in pharma, it's actually in generic pharma, it's one of the best places to start off, just selling random emollients and creams and things like that. So again, I wouldn't focus on derm as kind of the normal way of the world.
I've been wondering, you mentioned that Mark is vertically integrated, producing the drugs on the generic level, but because they have the same customer at the end of the day, is that any edge at all, or can you think of any edge at all where he can bring down that cost of goods sold and really kind of move up that delta and try to make some actual meaningful headway in this industry?
Well, the last time I checked, there were over 1,000 different APIs FDA approved, 6,300 SKUs, actual new NDA or ANDA codes available on FDA.gov. So to me, unless you're going to actually do all of them, you know, you're still going to be buying the bulk of your medicine from other places. So like if you make a generic, let's say for methylprednisolone, you still need prednisone, you still need dexamethasone, you still need all these other drugs. Like you have to buy them. You have to supply them somehow as a pharmacy. So the fact that maybe you can get, and I'm being very generous here, 1%, 2% of all those medicines, that would still take 5 years, by the way. To get 60 generics approved isn't easy with your own house. Get 1 or 2% of the generics you need as a pharmacy in-house made. I still don't think you're going to have a cost advantage over Teva, who's going to make, you know, on a ton scale, right? Some of these drugs by the ton. You know, how do you beat them on that? One. And then two, even if you do, okay, still not have 95, 98% of your medicine coming from other places. So that's the reason Teva doesn't have a pharmacy, right? Teva could open a pharmacy company really quickly. It just doesn't help them, right? So, you know, it doesn't make any sense to me. You know, I think he's trying to mix and match just ways to kind of cut at the healthcare industry, and it's not going to work. You know, the margin is in pharma. The margin is in physicians. The margin is in health insurance and managed care. That's where you would need to come at the industry if you wanted to cut costs. Managed care seems to have the fattest, funnest time at the moment. And again, I would not be surprised. I think the Democratic Party is really distracted right now. But I thought that was going to be kind of one of Biden's sort of crosshairs is to focus on managed care. You know, it was a boogeyman for Democrats for a really long time. But for whatever reason, they're getting a nice pass this year, or this administration. They got a pass, of course, during Trump's. They more or less got a pass during Obama's. So nobody's really tried to crack the whip on managed care companies and physician practices profits. So I think to have a sustainable healthcare system, to the extent you think it needs to be cheaper and more accessible, I think that, we need a few things. I think we need everybody to tighten their belt, not just one industry, but every industry in healthcare. And again, the problem is there's people at the end of the day. And these people depend on profits. And you are going to try to sort of cut revenues and salaries for people that don't want to give it up. And you're going to try to hurt an industry that already is struggling to produce breakthrough medicines. And you're going to end up cutting the amount of breakthrough medicines. I think that's what OIG said as well, that, by cutting pharmaceutical prices, you will reduce 5 or 10 new drugs a year. And those could be the very drugs that you need. So to me, it's a pretty easy choice to keep the pharma industry healthy. There are always trade-offs. It's a tough problem to solve. But I think the system works for the most amount of people. If you want to zoom in and worry about the bottom 5%, the bottom 1%, and then you fix that and you worry about the bottom 0.1%, the bottom 0.01%, it's admirable, but ultimately it's not doing what the best for the most amount of people at once. And I think we have a system that does that in my eyes. And I know that's a controversial sort of perspective.